Witamy na kolejnej maturze 2025. Dzisiaj rozwiązujemy wczorajszy arkusz z angielskiego dwujęzycznego. Na szczęście ten arkusz jest już w wersji tylko jednej, także nie będzie dwóch alternatywnych arkuszy. No i co? No i lecimy. Raczej nie
Dobrze.
mam nic więcej do powiedzenia. Odpowiedzi
Mm,
do poprzednich zadań będą w opisie. Jak macie jakiekolwiek pytania co do tego arkusza, możecie zadawać na czacie.
dobrze. O Boże, to już pytam tak. You are going to hear four people talking about hiring a car. For questions 11 to 15, choose the right speaker, AD. Put across X the appropriate column. In the table, one speaker must be chosen twice. You will hear the recording twice. 1. Draws attention to the fact that rental companies may make subjective decisions about the client's responsibility. Mentions self-indulgence as a possible motivation for renting a car. Suggests reserving a rental car well in advance in order to lessen the financial burden. Points out that some car hire companies might let you down when you need help in an emergency. Advises drivers to read all the small print to avoid a disadvantageous deal. Okay. When you've made a decision to drive to your holiday destination, the next question is: do you take your own vehicle or rent one? Obviously, renting a car is going to be a drain on your travel budget, but many road trippers fail to consider such factors as the depreciation of their own vehicle due to the additional mileage, the fuel efficiency of their private car compared to one they could rent, and the cost of purchasing roadside assistance cover essential to make sure they don't get stuck en route to their destination. If you decide that renting a vehicle is a better option for you, make sure you deal with a reputable car rental company. Otherwise, in the event of a breakdown, you might wait ages for the company to arrange assistance, or you could even be left completely stranded in the middle of nowhere. To tu mamy. Points out some companies might let you down when you need help in an emergency. When you're planning a family holiday, car rental can slip down your list of priorities. But unless you wish to burn a hole in your pocket, you'd better delve deeply into the intricacies of the numerous offers available on the market and scrutinize the contract you're going to sign thoroughly. Pay attention to every detail and footnote, no matter how unimportant they may seem. It's also worth looking at the extras, such as flood damage and the towing insurance, if you plan to drive off-road. And remember that car hire prices will rise the closer you get to your date of departure, so it's better to book a hire car as part of the initial process when arranging your holiday. To jest tu I tu. The car rental industry has a terrible reputation for treating people unfairly. Have you ever wondered why you need to have a credit card to book a hire car? It's all down to liability. If something goes wrong, the company will automatically, without any warning, charge you for any damage if they decide you're the guilty party. The money comes off your credit card without you having the right to dispute the charge. And then all you can do is submit an official request for a refund and just wait. You're completely at their mercy. It is ludicrously unfair, but for now there's nothing to stop them from doing this. There is no hard and fast rule for determining whether it makes more sense to rent a car or use your own vehicle for a vacation. I think that a rental car is far less likely to give you trouble on the road. It can also be an excellent opportunity to test a new model which you have always wanted to drive. Renting is always worth considering when you doubt whether your vehicle is good enough for the trip, or when you want a car that looks cool and is more recent than your own somewhat outdated model. Usually a road trip is a vacation. It's a break from the routine and a time to pamper yourself a bit. And there are many high-end cars to rent at prices lower than you might expect. So why don't you take this opportunity to upgrade your trip? Okay? Pierwsze nie było bolesne.
Okej, 1-2D. Oj, 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 dobra. Przechodzimy do drugiego.
Mm. You're going to hear two texts for questions 221 to 226. Okay. When answering the first question, Ben. Ooh, deepfake. Fancy. Which of the following is not mentioned among the likely consequences of the spread of deepfakes? Which sentence reflects Ben's opinion on fighting deepfakes? Mm. Our guest today is Ben Williams, an IT expert who specializes in deepfakes. Ben, why has deepfake technology become such a hot issue lately? Many experts have expressed their concerns about deepfake technology because it enables anyone with even amateur level computing skills to create realistic looking photos and videos of people saying and doing things that they did not actually say or do. By looking closely, the viewer can often tell that a video is a deepfake. But since the technology is improving at a breathtaking pace, it is predicted that deepfakes will become indistinguishable from genuine images or films before long. Many deepfake clips have gone viral. One of these was a commercial run during the hit documentary series The Last Dance. It appeared to show footage from 1998 of a sports analyst making shockingly accurate predictions about the year 2020. However, it turned out the clip was a deepfake created just days before it aired. Although it was only supposed to be entertainment, it made many viewers realize how easy it is to be taken in by such manipulated footage. Mm. Mentions a deepfake, which was an eye-opener for many people. Have the possible consequences of the proliferation of deepfakes been investigated? Yes, we are fortunate to have different media outlets which uncover the workings of the deepfake industry. Academics have also taken an interest in this subject. For example, a recently published report analyzes the range in threats that deepfakes pose. These include escalating social divisions, eroding trust in democratic institutions, and inflicting damage on the reputation of elected officials and candidates for office. Falling ratings for media outlets. Mm-mm. And the last question, is there any way to counteract the spread of deepfakes? Given that deepfakes are based on artificial intelligence, researchers are looking to AI for an effective means of identifying the use of deepfake technology. They have already developed sophisticated deepfake detection system which flag images that have been tampered with. Another defensive approach is to add a filter to an image file that makes it impossible to generate a deepfake. But optimists confident that we are in a position to prevent the spread of deepfakes are few and far between, and I wouldn't number myself among them. I don't believe that technological solutions will ultimately be able to eradicate deepfakes from public space. I rather imagine that, just like in the case of cybersecurity, the struggle against deepfakes will be an endless cat and mouse chase, where breakthroughs in deepfake detection spur further innovation in deepfake generation. Consequently, no single solution will suffice, but an essential first step is to increase public awareness that deepfakes are not benign. Which sentence best reflects Ben's opinion on fighting deepfakes? Any method of fighting deepfakes experts come up will not be a long-term solution.
Okej, no to tekst drugi zadania drugiego.
Mhm. In this review of the King's Speech, the speaker points out that from the speaker we learn that in the film Lionel Lodge, okay, based on the contents of the letter discovered by Lodge's grandson, we can conclude that. Okay, the King's Speech is a great film. Colin Firth and Geoffrey Rush give truly impressive performances, the former as King George VI and the latter as Lionel Lodge. The King's speech therapist to portray the King's stammer, Colin Firth, watched the available archive footage of King George VI speaking until he could reproduce the monarch's speech convincingly. The film takes us back to the time when the British monarchy began to adopt a more approachable image, when they became the royal family rather than proud rulers. Although the film's relationship to the historical record seems fairly accurate, there are two exceptions. The first problem is that the part Winston Churchill played in the abdication crisis has been stood on its head. He famously supported King Edward, so why in the film is he encouraging George to become king?
Wolałem o deepfake'ach tak naprawdę.
No, był przyjemniejszy. Eee, okay, a fact connected with King Edward's abdication is misinterpreted. The biggest distortion, however, isn't about Churchill, but about the speech therapist himself. In the film, as was actually the case, Lionel Lodge's consulting room is in Harley Street, a prestigious address in central London. Yet in the film, the place is depicted as a humble East End terraced house, with the front door opening straight onto a dirty pavement where ragged children play. The point was probably to show that Logue's friends with the man who became king bridged all kinds of divisions, but it contradicts the facts. Mm. It receives patients in a place which looks unimpressive. The real Lionel Lodge lived in with his family first in the Boltons, an exclusive neighborhood in Kenningston, Kensington, and then in Victorian villa called Beech Grove, which had 25 rooms and 5 acres of garden. Lodge had never been poor. He was a prosperous middle-class Australian who emigrated to Britain. He was perfectly loyal to his monarch and proud of having direct access to royalty. However, for obvious dramatic reasons, this wasn't the kind of personality the makers of the King's Speech had in mind. That's why in the film, Lionel Lodge became someone more impertinent, impertinent, an Australian with little respect for royal etiquette, who dares to address the king using his familial nickname, Bertie. In fact, the character of the speech therapist in the original screenplay was drawn even more crudely, but before filming started, Mark Lodge, the grandson of the famous speech therapist, unearthed correspondence exchanged between his grandfather and the king. He shared the letters with the director, who decided the screenplay had to be revised in order to soften the character. One of the remnants that survive from the original version is the swearing to cure stammering therapy, used to treat the king's stammer. However, Mark Lodge doubts if this method was ever used by his grandfather. According to Mark, the contents of the letters prove that although the two had a remarkable friendship, there was a certain etiquette that Lionel abided by. For example, addressing George VI unfailingly as your Royal Highness.
C. Okej. Dobra, to zadanie trzecie jest już w drugiej linijce.
Okej. O, otwarte. Oh, information sources. Lovely. Interviewer, Professor Allen, could you tell our students how they can avoid being misled by unreliable sources of information on the internet when doing their research? Well, you don't have to be an Einstein to be a great researcher. You simply need to put in some effort and learn to identify what a primary source and what is not. A news article, an award-winning book, or even Wikipedia may accurately portray the truth, but if it cites information from another source, then it's a secondary source for that information. Secondary sources typically have much less space to convey the facts, so they often leave out important details, and whether intentionally or not, they often filter or paraphrase information or provide an interpretation of the facts. This is why it's so crucial to access primary sources. You should also bear in mind that something can be a primary source for one fact and a secondary source for another. One of the reasons Professor Allen advises caution when dealing with secondary sources of information is that they often do not. Honest. Do not. I don't know, strive to. Mhm. Interviewer. But if the same fact is cited on many websites, then presumably it's true, isn't it? Professor Allen, not necessarily. Let me give you an example. In July 2008, Dylan Reeves, a 17-year-old student from New York, went on holiday to Brazil. One day, he and his brother spotted some wild animals. Dylan claimed that they were called aardvarks, but Dylan's brother insisted that aardvarks don't live in South America. He said they might be called coatis, a species closely related to raccoons. They decided to resolve the dispute by consulting Wikipedia. When Dylan checked the other entry, he realized he was wrong, but instead of admitting his mistake, he made a minor edit to the Wikipedia entry on the code, inserting the claim that they were also called Brazilian aardvarks. Obviously, he did not cite a source for this alternative name because he had invented it. Dylan knew what he had done was reprehensible, but assumed that someone would note the absence of citation and flag his edit for removal. Over time, though, something bizarre happened. Although there are no such animals as Brazilian aardvarks, the alternative name caught on. About a year later, not only was Dylan's edit still on Wikipedia, but references to the so-called Brazilian aardvark have since appeared in several newspapers and magazines. Name animal which they saw. Dylan expected that eventually his edit of the Wikipedia entry would be removed, but it didn't happen. Are you implying that we need to fact check all secondary sources? Well, if you don't want to end up reproducing errors, you should always search for first-hand accounts of a topic provided by people who have had a direct connection with it. So be ready to dig into one source after another until you finally reach the pot of gold. When you do, you may be surprised how different it is from the numerous secondary sources that you have relied upon. It's the primary sources of information.
O, masz w końcu pytanie merytoryczne.
Mm, Pierwszym. W 3-1. Have enough space? No, jak najbardziej, bo to też było w tekście. Możemy nawet dopisać, bo to było też verbatim w tekście i jest dobre.
Dobra,
Dobrze, tu proszę bardzo. Mm,
dobra. No to co? Czwarte.
mm,
Dawno
mm, mm.
czytania nie było.
Dokładnie, dobrze. Mhm. Primary School's Day at the Museum. A może najpierw zobaczę, co te znaczki. Look at the space mark 1 to 4, decide which of the following sentence fits the best in this passage. Okej, to ważne, żeby to przeczytać przed. And at that very moment the bronze hand jumped the last minute, both inside and on the public face outside the building, and the wave of human being with the movement of a natural disaster lapped up the steps and entered the hall. Okay. The enormous building waited as though braced to defend itself, standing back resolutely from its great courtyard under a frozen January sky, colorless, cloudless, leafless, and pigeonless. The courtyard was entirely filled with people. A restrained noise rose from them, like the grinding of the sea at low tide. They made slight surges forward, then back, but always gaining an inch. Inside the building, the Deputy Director of Security, DDS, reviewed the disposition of his forces. The duties that led to congratulation and overtime had always in the past been strictly allocated by seniority, as some of the older ones were still for the 100th time pointing out and grumbling that they were not to the fore. This is the time when we may need force, the DDS replied patiently. Experience too, of course, he added, conceal- conciliatingly, the huge bronze clock in the atrium, and at which he glanced, had the peculiarity of waiting then jumping forwards a whole minute. And this peculiarity made it impossible not to say 3 minutes to go, 2 minutes to go. 3 minutes to go, said the DDS. We are all quite clear, I take it. Slight accidents, fainting, trampling underfoot, the emergency first aid posts are indicated in your orders for the day. Complaints? Show sympathy. Disorder? Contain. Increase disorder? Communicate directly with my office. Wild disorder? The police to be avoided if possible. Crash barriers to be kept in place at all entries at all times. No lingering. Sir William doesn't approve of that, said a resolutely doleful voice. I fail to account for your presence here, Jones. You have already been drafted, and your place is, as usual, in stores. The real danger point is the approach to the Tom, the DTS added in a louder voice. That's been agreed both with your higher up With you and higher up, the first public day of the museum's winter exhibition of the Golden Child has begun. Boże, ale bolesny tekst. Nie, 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 i to. Mm. Znaczy, but I failed to account for. Never mind to czytać. It was the dreaded primary school's day. To mark out the route to follow, the courtyard had been partitioned by the darkly gleaming posters announcing the exhibition. The queue wound up and down like a giant serpent. 5 to 6 thousand children, mostly dressed in navy blue cotton trousers and flimsy plastic jackets, which made them half unconscious with cold. Having long since eaten the sandwiches which were intended for several hours later, more or less under the control of numbed teachers, insistent, single-minded, determined to see and to have seen, like pilgrims of a former day. They were earning their salvation by reaching the end of a journey. At one point in the courtyard, a faint steam of smoke, like that of a campfire, rose above the cloud of breath from the swarming red and blue-nosed children. It was the filled kitchen of the Women's Voluntary Service, with tea boilers at the simmer, strategically placed to help those who might otherwise collapse before they reached the steps. Here they all paused for a moment, drank an inch of hot tea, sweetened at too early of a stage for any choice to be made, threw down their plastic cups on the frozen ground, and then advanced towards the entrance over what soon became a carpet of plastic.
Uff,
Mhm. Yes, they were preoccupied with planning how to flee. Nie, nie. Inappropriately attired for such circumstances. From the last paragraph, we learned that nie było medical assistance. Oto, the posters advertising the exhibition served a practical purpose. Okay. Mm-mm. Czyli mamy wsadzić ten tekst do środka.
tak.
And at that very moment, bronze hand jumped to the last. No to będzie 3. Mm. Bo mamy at that very moment the bronze hand jumped to the last minute, czyli zegarek się przestawił. I mamy na koniec with the movement of a natural disaster leapt out the steps and entered the hall. I potem mamy the first public day of museum's winter exhibition of the Golden Child had begun.
No tak, 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 to faktycznie. Dobra, to... O, tekst 2.
A i owszem, krótszy. Ale to pytania otwarte. Dobrze. Portrait of a lady. Storm Klimt. Mystery solved. In January 2020, two men confessed to stealing and then returning a painting by Gustav Klimt, Portrait of a Lady. The picture was found concealed in a wall of the Ricci Odi Modern Art Gallery, the same gallery in Piacenza from which it had gone missing in 1997. The two men declared themselves the guilty parties in a letter to Ermanno Mariani, a journalist for the local newspaper Liberta. Mariani received the letter soon after gardeners had discovered the stolen painting while they were clearing ivy on an exterior wall of the gallery. They spotted a metal panel behind which there was a cavity with the painting inside. In the letter to Ermanno Mariani, the thieves confessed to stealing. Stealing. Okay. The thieves claimed they had returned the painting as a gift to the city 4 years before it was discovered. Mariani said they have been obscure about the details but have always maintained that the painting was not in the cavity all of the time. I'm not a technical expert, but it would have been damaged if it had been there for all those years. It wouldn't have been in the cavity. Mm, mm. While the in- intricacies of the crime are unclear, the motives for confessing are more transparent. The thieves made their first confession over 20 years after the theft, meaning they would avoid prosecution as the statute of limitations for the crime had expired. Mariani said the theft bore similar traits to some of their past crimes, for example, the robbery of 300 illuminated manuscripts from Passerini Landi Library in Piacenza. Prosecuting the thieves. Panie Brytanii thieves. Thieves. As the statute of limitations for the crime had expired, they would avoid prosecution. Portrait of a lady went missing during preparations for an exhibition in Piacenza aimed at showing it off after the revelation that it was the only double claimed known to the art world. The discovery was made by an art student, Claudia Maga, who realized that it had been painted over another claimed piece previously believed to be lost, Portrait of a Young Woman. The next surprise was the story behind the original painting. Klimt had fallen madly in love with a young girl from Vienna who had quickly become his muse. When she suddenly passed away, to forget the pain of his loss, he painted over her portrait. O, tu można bardzo różnie napisać. The subject. The first painting died.
Dobra, to mam to wpisywane. Dobra, no to jak jakieś inne wersje macie do tego, to się pytajcie, a my lecimy do zadania numer
5.
5.
How astronauts spend their time in space. For the majority of people, a typical day is as follows: a 9 to 5 job, some downtime in the evening getting ready for the day ahead, and 2 days off at the weekend. Decades of space missions have allowed us to reach this point, and along the way we've overcome many challenges. Okej, to szukamy, co tutaj wsadzimy. Okej, to będzie dy. NASA has successfully launched over 200 crewed space flights. In the pioneering days of the 1960s, American astronauts traveled to space on Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions that lasted days in small cramped spacecraft with crews of up to 3. The first of these took place on a fully functioning space station called Skylab. Uh, Wydaje mi się, że tu będzie E.
Mm, dobra, ja zacząłem F czytać. Dobra. I miałem tak,
E.
jak F,
Nie,
skoro
nie
tutaj
da
już jest Skylab.
Nie. E. Which contained the crew's quarters, cooking facilities, and even a running track. This represented NASA's early attempt at making life more comfortable for the astronauts on missions which lasted up to several months. The design Skylab To design Skylab, NASA went so far as to bring in an interior designer, Raymond Loewy. He approached the task with a few principles in mind: 8 hours of daily solitude, and mealtime shared together facing each other. With this phrase design also came the idea that astronauts could spend their time in space in a more pleasant way. In fact, the crew was given such a jam-packed list of tasks to complete every day with so little free time to relax that the outcome was overwork and frustration. Okay. Okay. To by. As a result, the astronauts were simply drained. At some point, they even refused to perform certain tasks. I tu będzie F.
Okej.
Okay.
Ajajaj. 7 to też. Nie, dobra. Ostatni długi tekst.
An advantage today's explorers enjoy when they are on long-distance hike, a route taken on the basis of misinformation, an unfortunate outcome of ignoring safety notices, a doubt cast on one of Darwin's findings. Following in Charles Darwin's footsteps. From the 9 times I have made the journey to the Galapagos Islands to follow in Charles Darwin's footsteps, the most enduring impression I have gained is of life's fragility. The minute a person steps off any of the tourist trails and heads into the untamed interior of one of the islands, there is the risk of death under the intense equatorial sun. On Santa Cruz Island, 17 people have disappeared since 1990. Some were subsequently found alive after having become lost in dense underbrush and volcanic terrain. The others weren't so lucky, although signs in numerous places say bluntly, "Do not go beyond this point, you could die. Not everybody complies." To będzie chyba tutaj. Making the same journey as Darwin, one begins to understand the hardships that he endured, which are not apparent to readers of his work. Trekking distances here are dictated by how much water one can carry, which limits each excursion to about 3 days. Longer excursions require provisions to be stashed along the route. To Darwin, such logistics would have been even more problematic, as he did not have modern lightweight equipment we have at our disposal. Still, the characteristic understatement reflecting perhaps his excellent physical condition. Darwin wrote of the 3,000-foot climb to the summit of Santiago merely as the walk was a long one. To będzie chyba tu. During one of the expeditions, I came to appreciate much more profoundly than I would have liked Darwin's comparison of Galapagos lava flows to infernal regions. When we were on Santiago, where Darwin had camped, our guides had suggested a shortcut across the coastal lava flow. What none of us could have known was that it involved more than 8 miles of almost continuous lava rock, not just a mile or two that our guides had led us to expect. A 6-hour excursion became a 51-hour nightmare as we climbed over piles of blocks with razor-sharp edges. To chyba będzie tu. On another occasion, I accompanied the botanist Alan Tye on a search for a rare plant which Darwin had collected in 1835. The plant hadn't been seen for a century, causing some to question the locality reported by Darwin. Unfortunately, we did find the plant, resolving the mystery and vindicating Darwin's record. However, our expedition was not without trails. Trails. At one point, while using a machete to clear our way, I inadvertently cut a branch of a tree whose fruit is poisonous to humans. Some of the tree's sap got onto my wristband and then into my eyes. The sting was almost unbearable, and dousing my eyes with water did nothing to help. Wiem, że to może być tu, ale zobaczymy jeszcze to E. Darwin personally reported no afflictions during his own Galapagos visit, although he did complain about a shortage of fresh water and the oppressive heat. More than once he was reminded of the potentially fatal consequences of excursions into the Galapagos wilds. One should not be surprised then that while Darwin was engaged in field work, he would have focused his attention substantially on surviving the many hazards of the Galapagos. But the truth is that Darwin became convinced of the theory of evolution Eureka like during his visit to the islands. How could he have not been? In retrospect, the evidence for evolution seems so compelling here. Okej, to nie pasuje nigdzie.
Okej. Dobra, przepraszam do trudnego.
W końcu coś przyjemnego. About 2,000 miles off the coast of South America sits the Chile-governed Easter Island. It was named by a Dutch explorer, Jacob Roggeveen, who discovered it on Easter Sunday in 1722. Polynesians are believed to have landed on the island around AD 800. They remained on the island until they had exhausted its resources and it became practically barren. What they left behind however, nie wiem, to nie jestem pewien szczerze.
A nad którym myślisz? Tak wszystkie, czy
Trzecim,
pierwsze, które? Okej.
7-3.
W sensie, ale jakieś odpowiedzi wszystkie myślisz, czy nad którymi się wahasz?
Hence raczej nie. Bardziej między however a consequently, najbardziej chyba.
Okej.
Ale hereby też, no, opartego mogą być. Więc tak. Może nie however. Dobrze. Jednak użyjemy hence.
Jednak hens.
Tak.
Wow.
Nie, bo to wszystkie cztery jakby jak czytasz, to brzmieniowo pasują. Ale hence chyba ma najlepsze znaczenie, bo wszystkie znaczą mniej więcej to samo. To jest problem. Wszystkie znaczą jakby z tego powodu, tak można powiedzieć.
Mhm.
Tylko różnią się lekkimi jakby kontekstowymi znaczeniami. A hence jest najlepsze, bo ma w tłumaczeniu jakby po pewnym okresie czasu, nie tylko nie tylko, że z powodu,
Mhm.
więc chyba najbardziej pasuje. Okej, następny. The massive effigies, each one on average 13 feet tall and weighing 14 tons, are thought to represent ancestral chiefs raised to the level of gods. According to archaeologist Joanne van Tilburg, about 95% of the statues were carved in the volcanic cone known as Raraku. Master carvers who refined their craft over generations chiseled out the statues using stone tools called toki and employed sharp obsidian tools to make finer lines. The real mystery, how a small isolated population managed to transport the megalithic structures to various ceremonial sites, had spawned decades of research and experiments. Van Tilburg says, "It is amazing that an island society made of 10 to 12 chiefdoms had sufficient unity and ability to communicate carving standards, organize carving methods, and achieve political rights of way to transport statues to every part of the island. Jestem ciekaw, czy jak wyjdzie klucz, to nie będzie jakiejś walki z tym 7.3, bo wydaje mi się, że można uzasadnić też poprawność innych opcji.
Trzeba sobie zapisać tą informację i poczekać. AC, dobra.
Wydaje mi się, że jest to zadanie nie za mądrze ułożone. No dobrze. Read the text and fill in each gap with one word. Okay. The statue trail featuring favorite film characters. The statue trail honoring Britain's love of film and cinema was launched in February 2020 in London's Leicester Square. The statue trail, known as Scenes in the Square and famed for its originality, isn't just a pop-up. It's a long-term project to celebrate unforgettable movies designed to appeal to all ages. The statues being bringing favorite movie moments to life. Each of the statues has been chosen to stand for a different era of cinema. Representing the earlier years is the legendary comedy duo Laurel and Hardy, who starred in over 100 films together. The next character to be seen is Bugs Bunny, who lurks in a nearby flower bed, celebrating his 80th birthday while the joyful figure of Gene Kelly is found clinging to a lamppost, creating the iconic scene from one of the greatest musicals of all time, Singing in the Rain. Elsewhere in the square, you can sit on a bench next to Mr. Bean or everyone's favorite marmalade-loving bear, Paddington. It goes without saying that Leicester Square is the perfect setting for such an installation, being the home of London's very first cinema, opened in 1930. Mhm. Okay,
Okej, no to
i gram.
9.
Mhm. 6 words. Having each of them right. I must admit that if it wasn't for your support, I wouldn't have pulled myself together. I wish people stopped parking cars on pavements, stopped parking their cars on pavements, their cars on pavements. Look at all the snow in the valley. It must have snowed heavily during the night. My parents are finding it hard hard finding it hard to come to terms with the fact that I'm moving out.
Come to terms.
Znaczy, jaka jest praca długa. O, a tu jest tak fajnie, bo są te rozprawki na 300 słów.
Mhm.
No takie to można pisać. Jeszcze fajne tematy mieli w tym roku. Nie najgorsza ta matura dwujęzyczna w tym roku, mówiąc szczerze.